Hey guys, thanks so much for clicking on this video. I know a lot of you use it to help you fall asleep, so before we get started, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're from and what time you're watching this. Alright, lights off, eyes closed, and let your imagination follow along with the story. I never imagined I'd end up working at a funeral home, not in a million years. But when you're 23, armed with a useless English degree, and your bank account is scraping single digits, you take what you can get. Money troubles aside, the job at Thibodeau & Sons Funeral Home seemed like a godsend at first. The pay was decent, far better than anything else in St. Martinville, Louisiana, where career options range from pumping gas to pulling the night shift at the 24-hour Winn-Dixie. The ad said they needed a night attendant, which sounded simple enough. Answer phones, be there if a family needed something in the middle of the night. I figured I'd mostly be reading or streaming Netflix on my laptop while getting paid. I grew up 30 minutes away in Lafayette, but St. Martinville always felt different, older somehow. The Spanish moss dangling from the live oaks seemed to droop lower here, the bayou water murkier, the air thicker with whispers of things people don't talk about in daylight. My grandmere used to say St. Martinville held secrets even the priests at St. Martin, Delaware Tourist Church were too scared to hear in confession. The funeral home sat at the edge of town, where the paved road gives way to gravel and eventually to dirt paths snaking into the swamp. It was an imposing Victorian structure, painted a deep burgundy with black trim, its wraparound porch adorned with ceiling fans that struggled against the humid air. Behind the main building was a smaller structure, the preparation room. They called it, though everyone knew that's where the embalming happened. Mr. Thibodeau himself interviewed me. He was a tall, rail-thin man with skin like parchment stretched too tight over bone, and eyes so dark they seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. His handshake was cold and dry, like grasping a bundle of twigs. Night work ain't for everyone, he said, his Cajun accent thick as rue. But it pays well for a reason. I needed the money, so I nodded eagerly. I'm a night owl anyway, I said. Mr. Thibodeau didn't smile. There are rules here, boy. Important ones. Breaking them, he trailed off, staring past me for a moment. Well, breaking them isn't advisable. That's when he handed me the list. A yellowed piece of paper with typed rules that looked like they'd been added to and amended over decades. Some were typed on different machines, others handwritten in faded ink. I skimmed it quickly, noting items about locked doors, checking certain rooms at specific times, and some odd prohibitions about mirrors and speaking aloud during certain hours. It seemed straightforward enough. Got it, I lied, folding the paper and tucking it into my pocket. Mr. Thibodeau's expression didn't change. Read it careful before your first shift. Learn it. Respect it. He slid a ring of keys across his desk. You start tomorrow night, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. I should have asked more questions. I should have wondered why the previous night attendant left so suddenly, or why the pay was so generous, or why Mr. Thibodeau's hands trembled slightly when he mentioned the rules. But all I could think about was making rent and maybe having enough left to fix my car's AC before the Louisiana summer made it unbearable. I'll be here, I promised, pocketing the keys. As I left, the elderly secretary, Mrs. Comeau, grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. Her eyes, magnified behind thick glasses, were wide with something that looked uncomfortably like pity. Be careful, Cher, she whispered. That place, it changes after dark. Things happen. Just follow them rules to the letter, you hear me? I smiled politely, extracting my arm from her grip, chalking it up to the superstitions that ran through small-town Louisiana like the muddy waters of the bayou. I should have listened to her. I should have walked away. But I didn't. My alarm blared at 9:15 p.m., jolting me awake in my cramped apartment. I was momentarily confused by the darkness outside. Right, night shift. I'd spent most of the day sleeping fitfully, plagued by strange dreams of corridors that stretched impossibly long and voices whispering in French, a language I barely remember from high school. I showered quickly, the lukewarm water doing little to wash away my unease. As I dressed in the black slacks and white button-down Mr. Thibodeau had specified as the uniform, I fished the rules list from my pocket and spread it on my kitchen table, smoothing the creases while I wolfed down a microwave burrito. The list was longer than I'd realized. Rules for night attendant at Thibodeau and Sons. 1. Always arrive before 10 p.m. Never leave before 6 a.m., even if someone tells you to. 2. Lock the front door at 10:05 p.m. precisely. Check that it's secure 3 times. 3. Turn on all lights in the viewing rooms upon arrival. Do not turn them off under any circumstance. 4. At 11:30 p.m., 1:15 a.m., and 3:40 a.m., walk the entire building. Count all doors. There should be 22. If there are more, do not open any of them and return immediately to the front desk. 5. The phone may ring between midnight and 3 a.m. Answer only on the 3rd ring. Speak only English, regardless of what language the caller uses. 6. If you hear knocking on the preparation room door, ignore it. Do not open that door after 10 p.m. 7. The thermostat must remain at 68 degrees Fahrenheit. If it changes, reset it immediately. 8. Should you smell flowers when none are present, recite the Lord's Prayer and sprinkle salt, kept in desk drawer, across all thresholds. 9. If the lights flicker, remain absolutely still until they stabilize. 10. Do not look directly into mirrors between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. 11. If you hear singing, especially in French or what sounds like Latin, put on the headphones in the middle desk drawer and do not remove them until the singing stops. 12. Never, under any circumstances, acknowledge if you see someone standing in the hallway between midnight and 5 a.m. unless they speak to you first. 13. The back door to the garden must remain locked all night. If you find it open, close it immediately, lock it, and pour a line of salt across the threshold. 14. At 5:45 a.m., before leaving, count all bodies in the preparation room against the logbook. The numbers must match. 15. If you encounter any situation not covered by these rules, call Mr. Thibodeau only at 555-9378. Do not use any other number, even if one is provided to you during your shift. I read through the list twice, my half-hearted amusement giving way to creeping discomfort. These weren't standard workplace regulations. They sounded more like precautions, superstitions, or warnings. Still, I needed this job. I glanced at my phone. 9:42 p.m. I grabbed my keys, folded the rules into my pocket, and headed out. The night was thick with humidity as I pulled into the gravel parking lot behind Thibodeau and Sons. Frogs and cicadas set up a deafening chorus from the nearby swamp, while moths battered themselves against the single security light above the back entrance. I sat in my car for a moment, watching the old Victorian through my windshield. In the darkness, it looked less like a place of business and more like something from a Gothic novel, all looming shadows and sharp angles against the starless sky. At 9:55 p.m., I forced myself to get out and walk to the back door. My new key slid into the lock with a heavy click, and the door swung open with a gentle creak, revealing a dimly lit hallway. The air inside was noticeably cooler, raising goosebumps on my arms as I stepped over the threshold. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding smaller than I'd intended. No answer, just the gentle hum of air conditioning and the faint tick of an antique grandfather clock from somewhere deeper in the building. I made my way to the front desk, an ornate wooden affair that wouldn't have looked out of place in a luxury hotel from a century ago. A single lamp cast a pool of warm light over a logbook, telephone, and a neat stack of pamphlets about funeral packages. I glanced at my watch. 10:02 p.m. Time to lock up. The front door was a heavy oak thing with stained glass inserts. I turned the deadbolt, then the decorative brass lock above it, then slid the floor bolt into place. Check, check, check 3 times, just as the rules said. Returning to the desk, I flipped through the logbook. According to the entries, there were 2 bodies in the preparation room, Eloise Bergeron, 89, and Thomas Landry, 76. No viewings were scheduled until tomorrow morning. I should have a quiet night. At 10:30 p.m., I decided to familiarize myself with the layout. The main floor contained a reception area, 2 viewing rooms, both with their lights on as instructed, Mr. Thibodeau's office, a small kitchen, and a restroom. The staircase led to a second floor with an apartment I assumed belonged to the owner. Another hallway led to the preparation room, its door firmly closed. I counted the doors as I went, 22, just as the rules said. I made a mental note of each one, determined not to lose count during my required checks. By 11 p.m., I was back at the front desk, already feeling the tedium of the night stretching before me. I pulled out my phone to check social media, but couldn't get a signal. Of course, the thick walls of this old place were probably blocking reception. At 11:28 p.m., I prepared for my first scheduled walkthrough, retrieving the rules from my pocket and reviewing Rule 4 once more. Count all doors, 22, no more. As I stood up, the lights flickered briefly, just once, quick enough that I might have imagined it. But I hadn't. I froze immediately, remembering Rule 9. If the lights flicker, remain absolutely still until they stabilize. After a few seconds of stillness, I relaxed. The lights were steady now. Just old wiring, I told myself. Nothing supernatural, nothing to worry about. I was wrong. I began my 11:30 p.m. walkthrough with a growing sense of unease. The building felt different somehow, quieter, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The antique grandfather clock in the main hallway ticked with ponderous precision, each sound echoing longer than it should. The first viewing room contained a polished mahogany casket, prepared for tomorrow's service. According to the placard, it would hold Eloise Bergeron, whose body was currently in the preparation room. Flower arrangements had already been delivered, filling the room with the cloying sweetness of lilies and roses. The lights buzzed overhead, their fluorescent glow making the white satin lining of the casket gleam unnaturally. I moved to the second viewing room, which was set up with chairs but no casket yet. The lights here seemed dimmer, though I couldn't tell if that was by design or if the bulbs needed replacing. I made a mental note to mention it to Mr. Thibodeau, then immediately wondered if changing the lighting would somehow violate Rule 3. As I turned to leave, a framed photograph on the wall caught my eye. It showed the funeral home as it must have looked decades ago, with a line of men in dark suits standing on the front porch. In the center stood someone who had to be Mr. Thibodeau's father or grandfather. The resemblance was striking. But what made me pause was the pale face in one of the upstairs windows. It was blurry, as old photographs often are, but something about the expression seemed wrong. Too wide, too intent, like someone watching a particularly fascinating show. I shook my head and continued counting doors. Mr. Thibodeau's office, 17. The small kitchen, 18. The restroom, 19. The staircase to the upstairs apartment had a door at the bottom, 20. The back entrance where I'd come in, 21. And finally, the preparation room, 22. All present and accounted for, no extras. I exhaled slowly, surprised at how relieved I felt. As I passed back through the main hallway, the temperature dropped suddenly. I could see my breath fogging in front of me, goosebumps rising on my arms as I hurried back to the front desk. I checked the thermostat on the wall behind it, 58 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 degrees lower than it should be. Remembering Rule 7, I quickly reset it to 68 degrees Fahrenheit, watching as the digital display blinked in acknowledgement. The cold lingered for a few minutes before the heating system groaned to life, gradually returning the temperature to normal. At midnight, I was flipping through an old issue of Field and Stream from the reception area when the desk phone rang. I nearly jumped out of my skin, my heart hammering against my ribs. The old-fashioned landline jangled again, harsh in the stillness. Answer only on the third ring. I counted 1, 2, 3. Thibodeau and Sons Funeral Home, how may I help you? I said, striving for professional detachment despite my dry mouth. Silence on the line, then a soft, wet sound, like someone breathing through a mouthful of liquid. Hello. I tried again, keeping my voice steady. Is anyone there? A voice finally answered, distant and distorted, speaking rapidly in French. I caught words here and there from my limited high school vocabulary. Something about waiting, something about doors. I'm sorry, I only speak English, I said firmly, remembering Rule 5. The French continued, growing more urgent. Then the voice shifted, speaking in English with a thick Cajun accent. Let me in, cher. I'm locked outside. My skin crawled. I'm afraid the funeral home is closed until morning. If you need immediate assistance, you can call Mr. Thibodeau at... The voice snapped, suddenly harsh. You need to open the back door now. I forgot my keys. I gripped the phone tighter. Nobody should be trying to get in at midnight. and the rules were clear about the doors staying locked. "Sir, I can't do that. Please call back during business hours." A long silence followed, then, so quietly I almost missed it, "You'll regret this." The line went dead with a click. I replaced the receiver with a shaking hand, then checked all the locks again. Everything was secure. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was waiting for me to make a mistake. At 12:45 a.m., I heard it, a gentle knocking from the direction of the preparation room. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Almost polite, like someone not wanting to disturb but definitely needing attention. Rule 6 flashed in my mind. If you hear knocking on the preparation room door, ignore it. Do not open that door after 10 p.m. The knocking came again, slightly louder. Tap, tap, tap. I focused on the magazine in front of me, flipping a page I hadn't read. The knocking stopped, and I exhaled slowly. Then it slammed against the door, bang, 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 so violently I could hear the wood straining against its hinges. I nearly fell out of my chair, my pulse thundering in my ears. The banging stopped as suddenly as it started, leaving behind a ringing silence. I stood frozen, staring down the hallway toward the preparation room, half expecting the door to burst open. Nothing happened. After a few minutes, I sank back into my chair, hands trembling. At 1:15 a.m., it was time for my second walkthrough. I didn't want to leave the relative safety of the front desk, but the rules were clear, and after that phone call and the knocking, I was taking no chances with disobedience. I counted carefully. Everything seemed normal until I reached the main hallway between the two viewing rooms. Where there had previously been only walls, there was now a door, a narrow, black-painted door with an ornate brass handle. I blinked hard, then counted again. This would make 23 doors, not 22. If there are more, do not open any of them and return immediately to the front desk. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the new door, and retreated to the front desk. My palms were slick with sweat as I pulled out my phone, desperately hoping for a signal to call Mr. Thibodeau. Still nothing. The desk phone sat there, promising connection, but I hesitated. The rules said to call only in situations not covered by them, and this a new door was specifically mentioned. I was supposed to go back to the desk, which I had done. Now what? At 1:30 a.m., the lights started flickering again. I froze, recalling Rule 9. The fluorescent bulbs overhead pulsed erratically, bathing the reception area in alternating bursts of light and shadow. I didn't move a muscle, barely breathing, as seconds stretched into a minute, then two. Finally, the lights steadied. As they did, I noticed a fragrance in the air, unmistakable magnolia and jasmine, sweet and heavy. Rule 8 came to mind. Should you smell flowers when none are present, recite the Lord's Prayer and sprinkle salt across all thresholds. There were flower arrangements in the viewing room, but this scent was different, more intense, closer, and distinctly magnolia and jasmine. The smells of a southern summer night, not the lilies and roses from earlier. I fumbled with the desk drawer, finding a small container of salt inside. As I began reciting, "Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name," my voice sounded thin and reedy in the quiet building, but I pressed on, carefully sprinkling salt across the thresholds of the reception area. The floral scent lingered as I worked my way through the building, steering clear of the extra door. I laid down salt lines at every doorway I could safely reach, murmuring the prayer like a mantra. When I returned to the desk, the smell was finally fading. I checked my watch, 1:55 a.m. The witching hour was approaching, and I remembered Rule 10, no looking into mirrors between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. I made a mental note to avoid the restroom during that window. At exactly 2 a.m., the temperature plummeted again. The thermostat read 45 degrees Fahrenheit this time. I reset it quickly, my fingers clumsy from the cold. The heating system groaned louder than before, a pain mechanical protest that didn't sound healthy. As I waited for the building to warm, I heard something that made my blood run colder than the air, a soft melodic singing from upstairs. It was a woman's voice, gentle, crooning what sounded like a lullaby in French. Face dodo, colas mon petit frère, face dodo heureux. Rule 11. I yanked open the middle desk drawer, grabbed a pair of noise-canceling headphones, and jammed them on, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped them. The thick padding muffled the singing, though I could still feel the melody, like a physical presence in the air. I kept the headphones on for nearly 30 minutes, only removing them when I was certain the singing had stopped. The building had warmed back to normal, and when I glanced down the hallway, the extra door was still there. At 2:45 a.m., I heard footsteps on the hardwood floor, slow, deliberate steps coming from the direction of the back entrance. I tensed, remembering Rule 12. Never acknowledge if you see someone standing in the hallway between midnight and 5 a.m. unless they speak to you first. I kept my eyes glued to the logbook in front of me, pretending to read. The footsteps drew closer, stopping just at the edge of my peripheral vision. Someone or something was standing in the reception area, watching me. Don't look up. Don't acknowledge it. I repeated this silently, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. A minute passed, then another. The presence remained, silent and watching. I could feel eyes boring into me, waiting for me to crack, to look, to speak. Finally, after what felt like forever, the footsteps resumed, moving away toward the mysterious new door. I risked a glance just in time to see a dark figure disappear down the hallway. Too tall, too thin to be human, its movements unnaturally fluid, as if its joints bent in all the wrong ways. I bit back a scream, squeezing my eyes shut until spots danced behind my lids. When I opened them, the hallway was empty. At 3:15 a.m., I realized I hadn't checked the back door since arriving. Rule 13 was clear. It needed to remain locked all night. With trembling legs, I made my way through the building, giving the extra door a wide berth. When I reached the back entrance, my stomach dropped. The door stood ajar, a thin ribbon of night air seeping in. I rushed forward, pushed it shut, and turned the deadbolt with a decisive click. My hands shook as I sprinkled salt along the threshold, creating a thick white line. As I straightened, I caught movement outside through the door's small window, a pale shape drifting at the edge of the property, where the manicured lawn gave way to swamp. It might have been mist rising from the water, or it might have been a figure in white, watching the funeral home with patient malevolence. I hurried back to the front desk, no longer caring if I seemed professional or composed. There was no one to impress here except maybe the dead, and whatever else roamed these halls after dark. The rules suddenly felt less like superstition and more like a survival manual. The time for my second formal walkthrough, 3:40 a.m., approached with agonizing slowness. Despite the thermostat reading a steady 68 degrees Fahrenheit, I couldn't stop shivering. My mind kept circling back to the extra door. Would it still be there? Had I imagined it? And what about the figure I'd glimpsed in the hallway? I checked my phone again, 3:38 a.m. Still no signal, of course. I was completely cut off from the outside world until my shift ended at 6 a.m., still over 2 hours away. The realization sat like a stone in my stomach. At precisely 3:40 a.m., I forced myself to leave the desk. Rule 4 is clear about counting all doors, and while I dreaded what I might find, I was more afraid of breaking the rules after everything I'd experienced. The reception area felt cavernous as I crossed it, my footsteps too loud on the hardwood. The grandfather clock ticked away, the sound measuring out my fear in steady increments. Down the main hallway, the extra black door remained, its brass handle gleaming dully in the fluorescent light. This time, I noticed something else, a thin line of what looked like water seeping from beneath it, forming a small puddle on the hardwood. As I watched, the puddle expanded slightly, the liquid too dark to be just water. I kept my distance and continued counting. Viewing room 1-1, viewing room 2-2, Mr. Thibodeau's office 3. I worked through the building, tension building with each number. When I reached the preparation room, 22, I hesitated. The door was firmly closed, but I could swear I heard movement inside, a soft sliding sound, like fabric dragging across tile. And then there was the extra door in the hallway, 23. But as I turned to head back to the front desk, I noticed something that made my heart skip several beats. A small door under the staircase, barely 4 feet tall, painted the same color as the wall. I'd missed it in previous walkthroughs, or maybe it hadn't been there at all. 24 doors. 2 extra. I practically ran back to the desk, pulse hammering in my ears. What was I supposed to do now? The rules only mentioned finding more doors, not what to do if the number kept increasing. Was I supposed to call Mr. Thibodeau? But the rules said to call only for situations not covered by them, and this was covered, sort of. I forced myself to take deep breaths. There were still hours to go before dawn, and panicking wouldn't help. I needed to stay calm and follow the rules as closely as possible. The desk phone rang suddenly, shattering the silence. One ring, two. I let it go to the third before answering. Thibodeau and Son's funeral home. How may I help you? My voice sounded remarkably steady. Nothing but static at first, then a voice broke through, a child's voice, singing softly in what sounded like an old Cajun folk song. The melody raised goosebumps on my arms, not because it was eerie, but because it was beautiful, heartbreakingly so, and somehow familiar like a half-remembered dream. Hello. I tried again. Who is this? The singing stopped abruptly. You're not following the rules, the child said, voice suddenly cold. You looked at her. You weren't supposed to look. What? Who are you talking about? In the hallway. You saw her, but you pretended you didn't. She knows. She always knows. My mouth went dry. I didn't mean to. It doesn't matter what you meant, the child interrupted. Rules are rules. Now she's angry. Who's angry? Who are you talking about? A long pause followed, then, so quietly, I had to strain to hear, Eloise. Eloise Bergeron, the deceased woman in the preparation room. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I slowly replaced the receiver, my hand trembling so badly I nearly missed the cradle. At 4:05 a.m., the lights began flickering again. I froze, remembering Rule 9. But unlike before, the flickering didn't stop after a minute or two. It continued, creating a disorienting strobe effect throughout the reception area. Without warning, the lights went out completely, plunging the building into absolute darkness. My breath caught in my throat as I fumbled for my phone, using it as a makeshift flashlight. Its weak glow barely illuminated the desk in front of me. Rule 9 only mentioned flickering lights, not a complete outage. What was I supposed to do now? The darkness felt oppressive, almost alive, a physical weight pressing against my skin. In the distance, something creaked, the sound amplified by the silence. Then another creak, closer this time. Footsteps. Someone or something was walking through the darkened funeral home. I ducked behind a desk, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The footsteps drew nearer, accompanied by a soft, rhythmic sound. Tap, drag, like someone with a limp. They stopped just on the other side of the desk. I could hear breathing now, wet, labored. I squeezed my eyes shut, as if that might somehow make me invisible. I know you're there, a voice rasped, an old woman's voice, thick with phlegm and age. I can smell your fear, Cher. I bit down on my knuckle to keep from making a sound. Come out, the voice sings soughed. I just want to talk. Something brushed against the desk, fingernails scraping along the wood. They sounded too long, too hard, more like claws than human nails. No one's supposed to be here, I whispered, immediately regretting breaking my silence. The scraping stopped. Oh, but I am supposed to be here, the voice replied, suddenly much closer. This is my party, after all. My funeral. Eloise Bergeron. Oh God, you're not real, I said, my voice breaking. You're dead. A dry, rattling laugh followed. Dead? Yes. Not real. That's where you're wrong, boy. The temperature around me plummeted, my breath misting in front of me, visible in the dim light of my phone screen. The rules, I stammered. I've been following the rules. Have you? The voice had moved, now coming from the other side of the desk. Counting all the doors. Making sure they stay closed. Keeping the salt lines intact. The salt lines, I hadn't checked them since laying them down. Had they been broken? Without warning, the lights flickered back on. I blinked against the sudden brightness, momentarily disoriented. The reception area was empty. No old woman, no sign anyone had been there at all. Except on the desk, clearly not there before, sat a small black button, like one from an old-fashioned dress or coat. Beside it was a business card for Thibodeau and Sons, turned over to reveal spindly handwriting on the back. She's trapped in the walls. Help her. My hand shook as I picked up the card, rereading the message. Who was trapped? Eloise? Someone else? At 4:30 a.m., I heard a new sound, soft weeping coming from behind the extra black door in the hallway. A child's crying, muffled but distinct. My first instinct was to investigate to help whoever was in distress, but I remembered the rules. No opening doors that shouldn't be there. The crying grew louder, more desperate, tearing at something primal inside me, the instinct to protect the child in danger. I took a step toward the hallway, then stopped myself. Rules. Follow the rules. But what if someone really needed help? What if there was actually a child trapped somewhere in the building? I was still wrestling with this dilemma when I noticed liquid again. Not water, but a dark fluid seeping under the reception area door that led to the main hallway. It moved too quickly, spreading across the hardwood floor in tendrils that seemed almost purposeful. I scrambled onto the desk, watching in horror as the liquid, blood, it had to be blood, continued its advance. The smell hit me then, coppery and thick, with an underlying note of decay. The child's weeping abruptly stopped, replaced by a low, guttural growl that no human throat could produce. The blood stopped spreading just short of the desk, then impossibly began to recede, flowing back the way it came, disappearing under the door. At 4:45 a.m., the phone rang again. I didn't answer it this time. It rang and rang, stopping after maybe 20 rings. Rule 5 only specified answering on the third ring, not that I had to answer it all. Almost immediately after the ringing stopped, my phone buzzed with a text message. I stared at it in disbelief. How was I getting a text with no signal? The message was from an unknown number. Open the preparation room door now. I deleted it, hand shaking. Another text followed immediately. Eloise is waiting for you. And another, she's not alone. And another, Thomas Landry is with her. Thomas Landry, the second body in the preparation room, according to the logbook. I turned off my phone completely, no longer caring about having a light source if it meant receiving more of those messages. At 5 a.m., exactly 1 hour before the end of my shift, the knocking began again, not from the preparation room this time, but from the extra black door in the hallway. Steady, insistent knocking that gradually increased in volume. Then the small door under the stairs joined in, a higher-pitched, faster knocking, like small hands pounding desperately. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. The knocking seemed to bypass my ears entirely, reverberating inside my skull. Stop it, I shouted, forgetting all protocol in my distress. Just stop. The knocking ceased immediately, leaving behind a silence so complete it buzzed in my ears. Then, from somewhere deep in the building, came the sound of laughter, a chorus of it, men, women, and children, all laughing together as if it's some private joke. The laughter faded, replaced by whispers, too many to count, overlapping and contradicting each other. He broke the rules. He spoke aloud. He looked when he shouldn't have. He'll join us soon. Another for the collection. Mr. Thibodeau will be pleased. This last whisper, clearer than the rest. May my blood run cold. What did Mr. Thibodeau have to do with this? Was he somehow responsible? Did he know what happened here at night? Of course he did. Why else would there be such specific rules? At 5:15 a.m., I heard a key in the front door lock. My heart leapt with hope. Was someone coming to relieve me early? The massive oak door swung open, and a familiar tall, thin figure stepped into the reception area. Mr. Thibodeau! I gasped, relief flooding through me. Something's wrong with this place. There are extra doors, and I heard voices, and there was blood. He held up a hand, silencing me. In the harsh fluorescent light, his face looked even more corpse-like than I remembered, skin stretched too tight over prominent bones, eyes sunken and dark. You've done well, he said, his Cajun accent thicker than before. Most don't make it to mourning their first night. What's happening here? I demanded, my fear giving way to anger. You knew about all this. You should have warned me. I gave you the rules, Mr. Thibodeau replied simply. What more warning did you need? Rules aren't explanations. People deserve to know what they're getting into. Mr. Thibodeau smiled, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too numerous. People deserve many things they don't get, Cher. That's the way of the world. He moved further into the reception area, his movements oddly fluid, as if his bones weren't quite connected properly. Besides, would you have believed me if I told you the truth? That the dead don't always stay quiet in St. Martinville. That some places are thin, the boundary between worlds barely a whisper. My mouth opened and closed wordlessly. He was right, I wouldn't have believed him. Your shift isn't over yet, he continued, glancing at the grandfather clock. You should return to your post until 6 a.m. Rules are rules, after all. With that, he turned and walked down the main hallway, directly toward the extra black door. I watched transfixed as he produced a key from his pocket, unlocked the door, and disappeared inside. The door closed behind him with a decisive click. I remained at the desk, counting down the minutes until dawn, trying to convince myself I'd hallucinated everything due to stress in the late hour. But deep down, I knew better. The rules existed for a reason, and I'd be back tonight to follow them again. Not because I wanted to, but because something told me I no longer had a choice. I don't remember driving home after my shift ended. One moment, I was walking out the front door of Thibodeau and Sons at 6:05 a.m., the pale light of dawn barely touching the horizon. The next, I was sitting in my apartment, staring at the wall, still in my uniform. I should have quit. I should have called Mr. Thibodeau and told him I wasn't coming back. I should have packed my meager belongings and left St. Martinville altogether. But every time I reached for my phone, my hand froze, fingers refusing to cooperate. It wasn't just the money, though God knows I needed it. It was something else, something I couldn't articulate, even to myself. A compulsion that settled over me like a shroud. I spent the day in a daze, drifting in and out of fitful sleep, plagued by dreams of endless hallways and doors that led nowhere. In one particularly vivid dream, I found myself in the preparation room, standing between two occupied embalming tables. Eloise Bergeron lay on one, her withered body partially covered by a sheet. Her eyes were open, milky and unfocused, staring at the ceiling. "She's waiting for you," said a voice behind me. I turned to find Thomas Landry sitting up on the other table, his chest bisected by the Y incision of an autopsy, the flaps of skin held open by clamps to reveal the empty cavity where his organs should have been. His face was gaunt but animated, eyes bright with amusement. "Who's waiting?" I asked. He smiled, revealing teeth stained brown with tobacco. "The lady of the house. Been waiting a long time for someone like you." I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat despite the air conditioning blasting at full power. By the time evening rolled around, I felt hollowed out, operating on autopilot as I showered and dressed for my second night. I reviewed the rules again, committing them more firmly to memory. If I was going back, and apparently I'd be better prepared. I arrived at 9:50 p.m., pulling into the gravel parking lot with a sense of dread so profound it felt like a physical weight in my chest. The funeral home loomed against the night sky, its windows glowing with warm light that belied the horrors within. To my surprise, Mrs. Comeau was still there, gathering her things at the reception desk. She looked up as I entered, her eyes widening slightly behind her thick glasses. "You came back," she said, her voice tinged with both surprise and what might have been respect. "Apparently," I replied, setting my bag down on the desk. She studied me for a moment, head tilted. "Not many do, you know." "After the first night, why didn't you warn me?" I asked, unable to keep the accusation from my voice. "Really warn me, I mean, not just some vague comment about following the rules." Mrs. Comeau sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. "Would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was just a superstitious old Cajun woman?" I had no answer for that. Besides, she continued, gathering her purse, everyone in St. Martinville knows about Thibodeau and Sons. Has for generations. We just don't talk about it. "What exactly is this place?" I asked, leaning forward. "What happens here at night?" She glanced at the grandfather clock, which showed 9:55 p.m., asked Mr. Thibodeau. "If you make it to the end of the week, he only explains to those who last that long." She headed for the door, then paused. "The logbook will tell you who's in the preparation room tonight. Be extra careful with Rule 12. With that cryptic warning, she left, the heavy front door closing behind her with a sound of finality. I checked the logbook as she suggested. 3 bodies tonight. Raymond Bourgeois, 92, Marie Dowett, 45, and my breath caught a child, Lily Thibodeau, 8 Thibodeau, a relation to the owner. The same small voice that had called me on the phone last night. I shook my head, trying to dispel the thought. Focus on the rules. That's what mattered. I locked the front door at exactly 10:05 p.m., checking it 3 times as required, then settled in at the desk, steeling myself for the long night ahead. The first hour passed uneventfully, too uneventfully, honestly. The building was quiet except for the steady tick of the grandfather clock and the occasional creak of settling wood. No temperature fluctuations, no mysterious scents, no flickering lights. I almost would have preferred something to happen rather than this suspenseful waiting. My 11:30 p.m. walkthrough was equally unremarkable. I counted the doors carefully, 22 exactly. No extras. The black door in the hallway and the small door under the stairs were both gone, as if they'd never existed. Even the preparation room door remained silent, no knocking or strange sounds emanating from within. I returned to the desk feeling oddly disappointed. After the previous night's events, this normality felt like a cruel joke, as if the building was toying with me, lulling me into a false sense of security. At midnight, the phone rang. I answered on the 3rd ring, as instructed. Thibodeau and Sons Funeral Home, how may I help you? Why didn't you help me? A child's voice asked, soft and sad. I told you she was trapped in the walls. My mouth went dry. Who's trapped? Who are you? A long pause followed. I'm Lily, the voice finally replied. Lily Thibodeau, the child in the preparation room. My skin prickled with goosebumps. You're not real, I said, trying to convince myself more than her. You're dead, she finished for me, a note of bitter amusement in her voice. Yes, for a long time now. But that doesn't mean I'm not real. I swallowed hard. What do you want from me? Help, she said simply. For her. For me. For all of us. I don't understand. Who's her? Who's trapped in the walls? The lady of the house, Lily whispered, as if afraid of being overheard. She's been here since the beginning. Since before the funeral home. Since before the town. The line crackled with static, Lily's voice fading in and out. She's not like the rest of us. She's hungry. And my uncle feeds her. Your uncle? Mr. Thibodeau. Lily continued, ignoring my question. The family has always served her, but some of us try to stop it. That's why I'm here. Why we're all here. The rules keep her contained, she interrupted urgently. But they're weakening. The doors are opening. She's finding ways. The line suddenly went dead. I stared at the receiver for a long moment before slowly placing it back in its cradle. My head was spinning with questions. Who was the lady of the house? What did Mr. Thibodeau have to do with all this? And what had happened to Lily? At 12:30 a.m., the temperature began to drop. I watched the thermostat fall from 68 degrees Fahrenheit to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, then 55 degrees Fahrenheit, the air turning bitterly cold around me. I reset it as instructed, but it immediately began dropping again. After the 3rd reset, it finally stabilized, the heating system groaning as it fought to warm the building. At 1:15 a.m., I began my 2nd walkthrough. I counted doors carefully, alert for any changes, but again found exactly 22. Everything seemed normal until I reached the preparation room. The door was ajar. Rule 6 clearly stated not to open that door after 10 p.m., but it didn't say what to do if it was already open. I stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the sliver of darkness visible through the gap. Should I close it? Leave it? Call Mr. Thibodeau? As I hesitated, a soft sound came from within, a child humming a familiar lullaby, the same tune I'd heard on the phone. Lily. I called softly, immediately regretting breaking the silence. The humming stopped abruptly. Then slowly, the door began to open wider, seemingly of its own accord. The darkened preparation room beyond came into view inch by inch. The sterile steel tables, the cabinets of equipment, the drains in the floor, and the 3 bodies, all sitting upright on their tables. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering against my ribs. This wasn't possible. The dead didn't sit up. The dead didn't stare with cloudy eyes fixed directly on me. Raymond Bourgeois, the elderly man, spoke first, his voice a dry rasp. "She's coming." Marie Dowett, the middle-aged woman, nodded, her head moving in jerky, unnatural motions. "The doors are opening." And finally, Lily Thibodeau, the small child whose feet dangled above the floor, her skin waxy in the dim light. "You need to find her before it's too late." I turned and ran, no longer caring about the rules or protocol. I sprinted back to the reception area, nearly colliding with the desk in my panic. The phone was ringing, had been ringing, I realized, for some time. I didn't answer it. Instead, I pulled out my cell phone, desperately hoping for a signal. Still nothing. I was trapped here with whatever was happening, with no way to call for help. The ringing of the desk phone finally stopped. In the sudden silence that followed, I heard a new sound, scratching, coming from inside the walls. Gentle at first, like mice scurrying through the insulation, then louder, more deliberate. It moved through the building, traveling from one wall to another, circling the reception area. "She's trapped in the walls." The scratching grew more frantic, more desperate, nails or claws tearing at wood and plaster from within. It converged on a spot directly behind the desk, the wall bulging slightly outward as if something was pushing from the other side. I backed away, eyes fixed on the bulge as it grew more pronounced. The wallpaper split with a sound like tearing fabric, revealing dark, rotted wood beneath. Something white pushed through the gap, fingers, long and skeletal, grasping at the air. The lights flickered violently. I froze in place, remembering Rule 9, but it was too late. In that stuttering illumination, I caught glimpses of a face emerging from the wall, gaunt, hollow-eyed, mouth stretched wide in a silent scream. The lady of the house. Darkness fell abruptly, plunging the room into absolute blackness. The scratching stopped. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the pounding of blood in my ears. When the lights came back on seconds later, the wall was intact. No tear in the wallpaper, no skeletal fingers, no face. As if it had never happened. But on the desk, where there had been nothing before, sat a tarnished silver locket on a delicate chain. With trembling fingers, I picked it up. It was old, the design intricate but worn with age. I clicked it open to reveal a tiny painted portrait inside, a young woman with dark hair and solemn eyes, wearing clothing from another century. Was this her? The lady of the house? At 2 a.m., I heard singing from upstairs, the same French lullaby from before, but this time sung by a woman's voice, rich and melancholy. I quickly put on the headphones from the desk drawer, but the singing persisted, as if coming from inside my own head rather than the building around me. The locket in my hand grew warm, then hot, until I was forced to drop it onto the desk. It fell open, the portrait visible, but changed. The woman's eyes were now staring directly outward, and her mouth was open in a silent scream. As I watched in horror, dark liquid began to seep from the portrait, spreading across the desk in tendrils. I jumped back, knocking over my chair. The liquid, blood, it had to be blood, continued to flow, far more than the tiny locket could possibly contain. At 2:30 a.m., the knocking began, not from the preparation room this time, but from every closed door in the building simultaneously. A thunderous, synchronized pounding that shook the walls and rattled the windows. Through it all, the locket continued to bleed, the pool expanding across the desk and dripping onto the floor. The smell filled the reception area, coppery and rotten, like meat left too long in the sun. I retreated to the far corner of the room, as far from the desk as possible. The rules didn't cover this. Nothing covered this. The knocking reached a crescendo, then stopped abruptly. In the sudden silence, I heard a key in the front door lock. The door swung open to reveal Mr. Thibodeau, impeccably dressed despite the late hour. He surveyed the scene, the blood-covered desk, the locket, me cowering in the corner, with an expression of mild disapproval. "I see you've met her," he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "She's usually not so demonstrative with new employees." "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, finding my voice at last. "What is this place? Who is she?" Mr. Thibodeau sighed, brushing an invisible speck of dust from his sleeve. "This property has belonged to my family for generations, built on land that was considered sacred, or perhaps cursed, by the natives long before the French arrived." He gestured to the blood-soaked desk. "She was here first. The lady of the house, as we call her. My ancestors made a bargain with her long ago." "What kind of bargain?" His thin lips curved in what might have been a smile. "Protection, prosperity, power. In exchange for certain accommodations. The dead," I whispered, remembering the bodies in the preparation room. "You give her the dead." "Not all of them," he clarified. "Just the special ones. Those with particular qualities she finds nourishing." I felt sick. "And the rules? A containment system of sorts? As long as they're followed, she remains mostly dormant, mostly satisfied with what we provide. And when they're broken," Mr. Thibodeau's expression darkened. "Then she hunts. And we cannot control what she takes." He moved to the desk, seemingly unbothered by the blood still spreading across its surface. With careful movements, he closed the locket and picked it up, wiping it clean with a handkerchief. "This belonged to her once, when she was still human," he explained, holding it up to the light. "One of the few relics that survived. She wants it back, of course, but we keep it safe. It's part of the bargain." "Who was she?" I asked, unable to help myself. "A young woman from one of the founding families. The details have been lost to time, but the story goes that she was walled up alive in the original homestead after she was found practicing certain forbidden arts." He tucked the locket into his pocket. "Her rage and power have only grown over the centuries. And Lily, your niece? She said some of you tried to stop it." A flicker of genuine emotion, grief perhaps, crossed his face. "Yes, my brother's child. She didn't understand the necessity of what we do, the importance of maintaining the balance. She's just a little girl." I protested. He corrected coldly. "She was just a little girl. Now she's part of the house, like all the others who interfered." He checked his watch. "It's almost time for your 3:40 a.m. walkthrough. You should continue your duties." "You can't be serious," I said, incredulous. "Deadly serious," Mr. Thibodeau replied, the word choice clearly intentional. "The rules must be followed, especially now that she's aware of you. Breaking your routine would be unwise." With that, he turned and walked back to the front door. "I'll return at dawn. Try to avoid disturbing our residents further." The door closed behind him with a decisive click, leaving me alone once more with the blood-soaked desk, the numerous doors, and whatever waited behind them, and somewhere in the walls, scratching, always scratching. The lady of the house continued to search for a way out. After Mr. Thibodeau left, I stood paralyzed, staring at the blood-soaked desk. The liquid had stopped spreading, but showed no signs of drying or evaporating. It gleamed wetly under the fluorescent lights, reflecting my terrified face back at me like a dark mirror. My watch read 3:38 a.m., almost time for the walkthrough. Every instinct screamed to barricade myself in the reception area, to ignore the rules and wait for dawn, but Mr. Thibodeau's warning echoed in my mind. Breaking your routine would be unwise. At precisely 3:40 a.m., I forced myself out from behind the desk. The soles of my shoes left bloody footprints on the hardwood floor as I began my rounds, counting doors with trembling lips. 1, 2, 3. The building felt different now, alive in a way I couldn't articulate. The walls seemed to pulse gently, like the slow breathing of some vast organism. The air hung thick and heavy in my lungs, tasting faintly of copper and decay. 16, 17, 18. When I reached the preparation room, I hesitated. The door was closed again, though I had no memory of shutting it after fleeing from the sight of the animated corpses. Did I dare open it for my count, or should I assume it was still door number 22? As I stood deliberating, Child's voice spoke from directly behind me. "She's awake now. Because of you." I whirled around to find Lily Thibodeau standing in the hallway. She appeared solid, not like the translucent ghosts of movies and TV shows. If not for her waxy complexion and the slight gray tint to her skin, she might have passed for a living child. "I didn't mean to wake anyone," I stammered. Lily tilted her head, studying me with eyes too old for her young face. Not anyone. Her? The lady. You found her locket. That always wakes her. Your uncle took it, I said. She nodded solemnly. He'll hide it again. But it doesn't matter now. She knows you're here. She can smell your fear. Lily stepped closer, her small feet making no sound on the floor. You need to be careful. More careful than before. What does she want? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Freedom. Vengeance. Hunger. Lily's expression darkened. She was a traitor once. A healer. But something went wrong. She turned to darker practices, and when they walled her up, she became something else entirely. And your family's been feeding her all this time? Lily nodded again. The dead sustain her. Keep her contained. But she wants more. She always wants more. Why are you helping me? I asked, suddenly suspicious. If you're part of this place now, why warn me? A sad smile touched her pale lips. Not everyone trapped here served willingly. Some of us remember being human. Being kind. She glanced nervously over her shoulder, as if afraid of being overheard. Finish your count. Quickly. I turned back to the preparation room door, took a deep breath, and opened it just enough to confirm it was still there. 22. The room beyond was dark, the tables empty, no sign of the bodies that had spoken to me earlier. When I turned back to thank Lily for her warning, she was gone. I hurried back to the reception area, completing my round with a mixture of relief and renewed dread. The blood on the desk had vanished, as if it had never been there. The only evidence of my encounter with the lady of the house was the set of bloody footprints I'd left across the floor, already fading to dull brown stains. At 4 a.m., the smell of flowers filled the air again, not the sweet magnolias and jasmine from the previous night, but something heavier, more funereal, lilies and chrysanthemums, the traditional blooms of southern burials. I remembered Rule 8 and began reciting the Lord's Prayer while retrieving the salt from the desk drawer. As I moved through the building, laying down fresh lines of salt at each threshold, I became aware of movement in my peripheral vision, dark shapes darting just out of sight, there and gone before I could focus on them. The prayer felt hollow on my lips, words I only vaguely remembered from childhood Sundays at my grandmother's Baptist church. But I persisted, hoping the intention behind the words mattered more than the words themselves. When I returned to the reception area at 4:20 a.m., I found all the salt lines I just laid were gone, the white granules swept away without a trace. And written on the desk in what looked like ash were 3 words: salt cannot save. My breath caught in my throat. The rules, the precious rules that were supposed to keep me safe, were failing. At 4:30 a.m., the lights began to flicker again. I froze in place as instructed, barely breathing as the fluorescence pulsed overhead. Through the stuttering illumination, I saw shapes forming in the shadows, human figures standing motionless around the edges of the room, watching me. When the lights stabilized, the figures vanished, but the feeling of being observed remained, an almost physical weight against my skin. The phone rang at 4:45 a.m. 1 ring, 2, I let it go to the 3rd before answering, clinging to the rules like a drowning man to driftwood. Thibodeau and Sons Funeral Home, I managed, my voice cracking. How may I help you? Heavy breathing filled the line, wet and labored. Then a woman's voice, deep and resonant, speaking in French. I caught words here and there, mort, death, prison, liberation, freedom, but couldn't piece together the meaning. I'm sorry, I said, keeping to Rule 5. I only speak English. The breathing stopped. The line crackled with static. Then the woman spoke again, this time in heavily accented English. The old bargain is broken, she said, each word precise and deliberate. The walls are weak. The doors are open. I am coming. Who are you? I asked, forgetting protocol. Are you the lady of the house? A low, throaty laugh answered me. I've had many names over the centuries. The Thibodeau family called me lady to tame me, to make me seem gentle and manageable. The voice hardened. I am neither. What do you want with me? I asked, unable to stop myself. You opened the way, she replied. You found my locket. My heart. You spoke to my allies. You broke the rules. Another laugh, colder this time. "So now you will pay the price, as the Thibodeau family has paid for generations. Blood for blood. Life for life." The line went dead, leaving me with a dial tone buzzing in my ear like an angry wasp. As I set the receiver down, the temperature plummeted. Within seconds, my breath misted in front of me, and frost began forming on the surface of the desk. The thermostat on the wall dropped rapidly. 60, 50, 40, 30. I rushed to reset it as per Rule 7, but the display continued its free fall, the digits blurring together until they settled on a series of 8s, 88.8. The cold was unbearable now, seeping through my clothes and into my bones. My fingers turned numb, then painful, then numb again. Ice crystals formed on my eyelashes, and my lungs burned with each frozen breath. And still, the temperature dropped. Something was happening to the walls. The pale cream wallpaper bubbled, peeling back in strips to reveal not plaster or wood but ice-thick, ancient ice with dark shapes suspended within, like insects trapped in amber. As I watched in horror, the ice spread across the walls and ceiling, encasing the reception area in a gleaming shell. And in that ice, faces began to appear, dozens of them, pressed against the frozen surface as if trying to push through. Men, women, children, their features contorted in silent screams, their hands reaching, grasping. I recognized some of them from the logbook. Eloise Bergeron, Thomas Landry, Raymond Bourgeois, Marie Dowett, generations of St. Martinville's dead, preserved in the ladies' frozen prison. A small face appeared directly in front of me. Lily, her eyes wide with terror. "Run," she mouthed, her breath forming a small cloud against the ice. "Hide." The grandfather clock chimed 5 times, though the hands still showed 4:50 a.m. The sound resonated strangely in the ice-encased room, each note stretching and distorting until it barely resembled a clock at all. As the final chime faded, cracks appeared in the icy walls, thin at first, then widening, branching like lightning across the frozen surface. Water began to seep through, then pour, bringing with it the overwhelming smell of the swamp, mud, rotting vegetation, and stagnant water. I backed away as the reception area began to flood, the foul water rising quickly around my ankles. Something moved beneath the surface, sinuous shapes darting between my legs, too fast to identify. The ice continued to crack and calve like a melting glacier, massive chunks crashing into the rising water. The faces trapped within screamed silently as they sank beneath the murky flood. When the water reached my knees, I felt something grab my ankle, a hand, cold and strong, trying to pull me under. I kicked free and splashed toward the hallway, desperate to reach higher ground. The water followed, pursuing me like a living thing. As I fled down the corridor, every door I passed burst open, releasing more of the foul liquid until the entire building seemed to be drowning from within. I finally reached the staircase leading to the second floor, Mr. Thibodeau's apartment. Water cascaded down the steps like a waterfall running in reverse, but I fought against the current, dragging myself upward by the railing. At the top of the stairs stood a door, plain and unassuming but somehow menacing in its ordinariness. I hesitated, remembering the rules about not opening doors that shouldn't be there. But as the water continued to rise below me, I had no choice. I turned the knob and pushed the door open, revealing not an apartment but a small windowless room with bare wooden walls. The only furnishing was a simple wooden chair in the center, facing the far wall. And sitting in that chair was Mr. Thibodeau. He didn't turn as I entered, didn't acknowledge my presence at all. He simply sat, rigid and unmoving, staring at the wall in front of him, a wall that was bulging outward, with splintering as something pushed from within. "Mr. Thibodeau," I gasped, water dripping from my sodden clothes. "We need to get out of here. The building's flooding, and there's something in the water." "She's breaking through," he interrupted, voice oddly calm. "After all these years, all those sacrifices." He laughed, a brittle sound devoid of humor. "And you know what? Part of me is relieved. So tired of feeding her generation after generation, keeping the bargain, maintaining the rules. We need to leave," I insisted, glancing nervously behind me. The water hadn't followed me into this room, but I could hear it surging against the door, seeking entry. "No one leaves," Mr. Thibodeau replied, finally turning to face me. His eyes were hollow, cheeks sunken, as if he'd aged decades in hours. That's the final rule, the one I didn't write down. No one who knows about the lady ever leaves St. Martinville. As he spoke, the wall behind him split open with a thunderous crack. Skeletal hands, impossibly long and spindly, reached through the gap, wrapping around Mr. Thibodeau's neck and shoulders. He didn't resist as he was pulled backward into the wall, his body folding and compressing in ways a human form shouldn't be able to. His expression remained eerily serene, even as his bones cracked audibly and his flesh compressed. "Your turn soon," he called, voice muffled as the wall began to close around him. "She's hungry." After all this time, so hungry. Then he was gone, the wall sealing behind him as if it had never been broken. Only a dark stain remained, seeping outward from the center like blood spreading through cloth. I backed toward the door, while rising in my throat. When my hand touched the knob, I found it ice cold, so cold it burned my palm, making me cry out in pain. The door swung open of its own accord, revealing not the waterlogged staircase I expected, but a long, unfamiliar corridor stretching into darkness. The walls were no longer wood but rough stone, dripping with moisture and covered in a slick black mold that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. From somewhere deep in that impossible hallway came the sound of singing, a woman's voice, rich and hypnotic, performing what might have been a lullaby or a dirge, the words indistinct but profoundly unsettling. And walking toward me, emerging from the darkness step by deliberate step, was a figure in white, the lady of the house, no longer trapped, no longer contained. The figure approaching through the stone corridor moved with unnatural grace, her white dress floating around her as if underwater. She was both beautiful and terrible, a woman, perhaps in her 30s, with features that might once have been lovely but were now stretched too tight over her skull, giving her the appearance of a porcelain doll left too long in the sun. Her eyes were the worst part, completely black like pools of oil, with no whites or irises visible. They reflected no light, absorbing it instead, two voids set in her pale face. I backed away, my shoulder blades pressing against the wall behind me. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The stone corridor had replaced the familiar hallways of the funeral home, and the door through which I'd entered had disappeared. The lady stopped several feet away, her head tilting to one side as she studied me. Her movements were jerky, mechanical, like a marionette controlled by inexperienced hands. At last, she said, her voice the same as on the phone, deep and resonant, with a thick French Cajun accent that seemed to belong to another century. Face to face, I struggled to find my voice. "What do you want from me?" She smiled, revealing teeth too numerous and sharp to be human. "What do I want?" "Freedom. Vengeance. Sustenance. I don't understand," I said, stalling for time while desperately searching for an escape route. "I just took a job. I didn't know about any of this. I've been trying to follow the rules." "The rules," she sneered, the word dripping with contempt. "Thibodeau chains meant to keep me bound, to control what cannot be controlled." She moved closer, the air growing colder with each step. "Do you know what it's like to be trapped for centuries? To be fed scraps of death while craving life?" Her hands shot out, fingers wrapping around my wrist. Her touch was like ice burning cold against my skin. Images flooded my mind, disjointed, horrific flashes I struggled to comprehend. A young woman in 18th century clothing, collecting herbs in a swamp, healing the sick with poultices and prayers. The same woman, older now, desperate as a plague ravages the settlement, turning to darker arts to save those she loves. Betrayal, as the very people she tried to save turn against her, calling her witch, demon, monster. Men dragging her from her home, taking her to an unfinished wall in a new building. Her screams as they sealed her in, brick by brick, leaving her to suffocate in darkness. And then transformation. Rage and pain and dark power twisting her, changing her into something no longer human. Years stretching into decades, decades into centuries, her hatred growing, feeding on the death around her. The bargain with the first Thibodeau, offering him prosperity and influence in exchange for freedom that never came. Only more death, more sustenance that never satisfied. I yanked my hand away, gasping at the psychic assault. "You were a healer," I managed, my mind reeling from what I'd seen. Before they did that to you. Something flickered across her face, surprise, perhaps, that I had gleaned so much from the contact. I tried to save them, she said, her voice momentarily softer, almost human. When the yellow fever came, nothing worked. Not the herbs, not the prayers. So I turned to older ways. Blood magic. Soul bargains. Her expression hardened again. They feared what they didn't understand. Called me witch instead of savior. I'm sorry for what happened to you, I said, meaning it despite my terror. But that was centuries ago. Those people are long dead. Their descendants live on, she hissed. The Thibodeau family, who made their fortune from my power while keeping me imprisoned. The town that forgot me, built over my unmarked grave. Her form seemed to ripple, features blurring before re-solidifying. And now you, who will help me break the final chains? I won't help you, I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. Whatever you're planning, you already have helped me, she interrupted, that terrible smile returning. By finding my locket. By speaking to those who opposed me. By breaking the rules, weakening the barriers. She gestured to the stone corridor around us. This place, between the walls, between worlds, was once my prison. Now it will be my gateway. As she spoke, the stones began to shift, grinding against each other. The corridor widened, the ceiling rising until we stood in a vast chamber that couldn't possibly fit within the funeral home's dimensions. The walls were lined with alcoves, each containing a body in various states of decay, hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, stretching up into darkness. My collection, the lady said, following my horrified gaze. Everyone who has ever died within these walls. Their bodies feed the soil, but their souls, she made a grasping motion with her skeletal hand. Their souls are mine. Among the countless dead faces, I recognized a few. Eloise Bergeron, Thomas Landry, the others from the logbook. And Mr. Thibodeau, his body twisted and broken, wedged into an alcove near the floor, eyes still open and aware, watching me with mute suffering. This isn't right, I said, while rising in my throat. They deserve peace, not this. Peace. The lady laughed, the sound echoing unnaturally in the chamber. There is no peace in death, only transition. They would have been claimed by something eventually, the cold ground, the worms, oblivion. At least with me, they remain. They are remembered. You're keeping them prisoner, I argued. Using them. As I was used, she countered. As I was imprisoned, she moved closer, her dress now writhing around her like living smoke. But soon, very soon, I will be free. And they will come with me into the world, an army of the forgotten dead. A small movement caught my eye, a child slipping between the alcoves, ducking behind columns. Lily watching us, her expression grave. She held a finger to her lips, then pointed urgently to something on the ground near my feet. I glanced down as subtly as possible and saw it, the silver locket, the one Mr. Thibodeau had taken from the desk. How it had gotten here, I couldn't imagine, but Lily's intent was clear. It was important. What will you do if you're free? I asked, trying to keep the lady's attention while I figured out how to reach the locket without being obvious. Kill everyone in St. Martinville for revenge. Some will die, she admitted with unsettling casualness. The Thibodeau bloodline must end, all of it. But the others, she shrugged, a too fluid motion that made my skin crawl. I was a healer once. I can be again. Those who accept me, who honor me, will prosper under my protection. And those who don't, her black eyes gleamed, will feed my children. She gestured to the alcoves, where the corpses had begun to stir, flesh rippling as if something moved beneath the skin. I needed to act now, before those things fully awakened. In one desperate move, I lunged for the locket, snatching it from the ground and clutching it in my fist. The lady shrieked, the sound piercing my eardrums like Bridger handles like a physical pain. Give that to me, she demanded, her form flickering like a bad television signal, stretching and contracting in impossible ways. It's mine. What is it? I asked, backing away, the locket burning cold in my palm. Why is it so important? My heart, she snarled, advancing on me. My link to life, to what I once was. the source of my power and my prison. Her beautiful, terrible face contorted with rage. Return it, or I will make your suffering legendary, even among my collection. I glanced at Lily, who had emerged from behind a column. She shook her head frantically, then pointed to the locket, then to her own chest, making a twisting motion with her hand. Understanding dawned, the locket wasn't just jewelry. It was a literal key to the lady's power. If I gave it to her, there would be nothing constraining her anymore. No, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I won't give it to you. The lady's shriek of rage shook the chamber, causing dust and small stones to rain down from above. The bodies in the alcoves were fully animate now, struggling to free themselves from their niches, reaching toward me with decayed hands. Then you will join my collection, she hissed, her form elongating, fingers extending into dagger-like claws. Your soul will feed me for 100 years. She lunged, impossibly fast. I dodged, nearly losing my footing on the uneven stone floor. The locket in my hand grew colder, so cold it felt like it was fusing to my flesh. I cried out in pain, but refused to drop it. The lady pursued me across the chamber, herding me toward the writhing mass of animated corpses. I was running out of space, out of options. In desperation, I clicked open the locket, hoping to find something, anything that might help. The tiny portrait inside had changed again. Now it showed the lady as she must have been in life, young, beautiful, human, her eyes clear and determined. As I stared at it, I heard a voice in my mind, different from the monster pursuing me, softer, with the same accent but lacking the malevolence. Break it. Break the locket. Set me free. It will kill you, I gasped, dodging another attack from the lady, who seemed unable or unwilling to approach too close to the open locket. I'm already dead, the voice replied. But she is something else. My rage, my pain, my darkest desires given form. Break the locket, and this ends. Don't listen, the lady snarled, seeming to hear the exchange. Close it. Give it to me. I looked to Lily, who had moved to stand beside Mr. Thibodeau's alcove. She nodded solemnly, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. I'm sorry, I whispered, unsure if I was addressing the voice in the locket, Lily, or myself. Then I threw the locket to the stone floor with all my strength. It didn't break. The lady laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Fool. Did you think it would be so easy? She gestured, and the locket skittered across the floor toward her. Nothing made in life breaks so simply in this place. Before she could reach it, a new figure darted from between the alcoves, Mr. Thibodeau, somehow freed from his prison. His body was still broken, but moving with desperate purpose. He snatched up the locket and looked at me, his eyes clear for the first time since I'd met him. The rules, he gasped, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. They were meant to protect, not imprison. I forgot that. My family forgot that. He clutched the locket to his chest. Rule 16. The one I never told you. In case of catastrophic containment failure, he closed his eyes, murmuring words in French I couldn't understand. The locket began to glow, a warm golden light seeping between his fingers. The lady shrieked, rushing toward him. No, you cannot. The bargain is ended, Mr. Thibodeau finished. He looked at me one last time. Run. Through there. He nodded toward a narrow opening that had appeared in the wall behind me. Don't stop. Don't look back. Before I could respond, the locket in his hands flared with blinding light. The lady screamed, the sound shifting from rage to agony as her form began to disintegrate, black smoke pouring from her eyes and mouth. I didn't wait to see more. I ran for the opening, squeezing through into a dark, narrow passage. Behind me, the light grew more intense, the lady's screams more desperate. The stone walls around me trembled, dust and debris raining down as the passage threatened to collapse. I ran blindly, one hand on the wall to guide me, the other held out in front to avoid collision. The passage twisted and turned, the air growing progressively warmer, damper, more like the Louisiana night than the cold stone chamber. A crossroads appeared, 3 identical passages leading in different directions. I hesitated, panic rising in my throat. Which way? A small hand slipped into mine. Lily, somehow beside me despite not having followed through the opening. Her Her touch was cool but not cold, almost solid. "This way," she said, tugging me toward the rightmost passage. "Hurry. It's all coming apart." I followed without question, letting her guide me through the labyrinthine corridors as the rumbling grew louder behind us. Cracks appeared in the walls and ceiling, widening with alarming speed. "What's happening?" I gasped as we ran. "The lady is dying," Lily replied, her voice echoing strangely. "Really dying this time. And her world is dying with her. And you, Mr. Thibodeau, all the others." She glanced back at me, a sad smile on her small face. "Some will go on. Some will find peace. Others," she shrugged, the gesture heartbreakingly adult on her childish frame. "Others will linger. There are more things in St. Martinville than just the lady." The passage ahead lightened, a rectangle of gray pre-dawn light visible in the distance. We sprinted toward it as the ceiling began to collapse in earnest behind us. "Almost there," Lily encouraged, her form growing more translucent with each step toward the exit. "Just a little further." We burst through the opening together, emerging into the gravel parking lot behind Thibodeau and Sons. The funeral home stood intact before us, its burgundy exterior pale in the first light of dawn. But even as we watched, cracks appeared in its walls, spreading like lightning across the facade. "Go," Lily urged, her voice fading as her form grew increasingly transparent. "Get as far away as possible." "What about you?" I asked, reluctant to leave her. Her smile was peaceful now, the fear gone from her eyes. "I'm already where I need to be. This was my home, twisted as it was. I'll see what comes after." With that, she vanished, leaving me alone in the parking lot as the funeral home began to collapse in on itself, the walls buckling inward as if crushed by an invisible hand. I ran to my car, fumbling with the keys as pieces of the building crashed to the ground behind me. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out of the lot, gravel spraying from beneath my tires. In the rearview mirror, I watched Thibodeau and Son's funeral home implode, the entire structure folding in on itself like a house of cards. A plume of dust rose into the dawn sky, tinged gold and pink by the rising sun. And beneath the rumble of the collapse, I could have sworn I heard singing a French lullaby, sung by a woman's voice, finally at peace. I drove without direction, my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep the car on the road. The sun continued its ascent, bringing with it a muggy Louisiana morning that felt surreally normal after the nightmare I had just escaped. Birds sang in the cypress trees. Early morning fishermen launched their boats into the bayou. The world spun on, oblivious to what had happened at Thibodeau and Sons. Eventually, I found myself at a small 24-hour diner on the outskirts of Lafayette. I stumbled inside, aware of how I must look, clothes filthy and torn, face streaked with dirt and what might have been blood, eyes wild with shock and exhaustion. The elderly waitress barely batted an eye, simply guiding me to a corner booth and pouring coffee without being asked. Louisiana hospitality at its finest. Or perhaps she'd seen worse. "You all right, Cher?" she asked, her Cajun accent immediately reminding me of Mr. Thibodeau, of the lady, of everything I was trying to process. I trailed off, unsure how to answer. Alive? Sane? Neither felt entirely certain at the moment. She nodded as if I'd given a complete response, patting my shoulder with a weathered hand. "You drink that coffee. I'll bring you some eggs and biscuits. On the house." She walked away before I could protest, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the steaming mug. I checked my phone, which had regained service once I'd fled St. Martinville. It was 7:23 a.m., just over an hour since I'd watched the funeral home collapse. No missed calls, no texts, as if the world hadn't noticed the supernatural catastrophe that had just occurred. Should I call someone? The police? What would I even say? "Hello. I'd like to report a centuries-old vengeful spirit who murdered my boss and nearly trapped my soul in a collection of the undead." I sipped the coffee, its bitter warmth grounding me in reality. My hands trembled less with each swallow. When the waitress returned with a plate of eggs, biscuits smothered in gravy, and crispy bacon, I realized I was ravenous. I devoured the food while flipping through news sites on my phone, searching for any mention of the funeral home's destruction. Nothing. Not even a local traffic update or emergency notification. As I was finishing my second cup of coffee, the bell above the diner door jingled. I glanced up reflexively, then froze mid-sip. Mrs. Comeau, the elderly secretary from Thibodeau and Sons, stood in the entrance, scanning the diner until her gaze settled on me. She walked over with surprising swiftness for a woman her age, sliding into the booth across from me without invitation. "You survived," she said simply, adjusting her thick glasses. "I wasn't sure you would." I set down my mug carefully. "How did you find me?" A thin smile crossed her lined face. "St. Martinville isn't the only place with old ways, Cher. There are those of us who watch, who know. You knew it was happening at the funeral home," I said, an accusation rather than a question. "You knew about the lady, about what Mr. Thibodeau was doing." She nodded, accepting a cup of coffee from the waitress with a murmured thanks. "Many of us knew or suspected. The Thibodeau family has been in St. Martinville since the beginning. Their prosperity came at a price few understood, but you did. My grandmother was a treader. A healer like the lady was before." She sipped her coffee. She passed down stories, warnings. "Keep your distance from the Thibodeau place after dark. Never accept their charity without giving something in return. Never speak ill of the dead within earshot of their walls." My mind raced with questions. "The funeral home, it's gone." It collapsed. Mrs. Comeau's eyebrows rose slightly. "Entirely," I nodded, describing the implosion I'd witnessed, the building folding in on itself as if swallowed by an unseen force. She crossed herself, murmuring something in French under her breath. "Then it's really over. The bargain, the collection, all of it. What happens now?" I asked. "To the souls? The people trapped there. Some will find peace," she said, echoing Lily's words from earlier. "Those who were merely caught, not bound. Others," she shrugged, a gesture of resignation rather than indifference. "Some ties don't break so easily, even in death." I thought of Lily, her small form fading as the funeral home began to collapse. Had she found peace, or was she still there amid the ruins? "And the lady?" I pressed. "Is she truly gone?" Mrs. Comeau was silent for a long moment, staring into her coffee as if reading tea leaves. "Such power doesn't simply vanish," she finally said. "It transforms, changes. The worst of her, the rage, the hunger, that may be gone. But her essence, the part that was once human," she shook her head, "that lingers. In the soil, in the water of the bayou, in the air we breathe. St. Martinville was built on her bones, Cher. We've been living with her all along." A chill ran through me, despite the diner's warmth. "Why are you telling me this? Why track me down?" "Because you're part of it now." She reached across the table, her gnarled fingers catching my wrist with surprising strength. "You stood in her presence. You held her heart. You witnessed the end of a curse centuries in the making. Such things leave marks." I pulled my hand away, suddenly conscious of a dull ache in my palm, the same palm that had held the locket. Looking down, I saw a small, silvery scar in the center, shaped like a crescent moon. It hadn't been there before. "What does it mean?" I asked, trying to keep the panic from my voice. "It means you'll never truly leave St. Martinville behind," Mrs. Comeau said, her expression softening with something like pity. "You can move away, change your name, try to forget. But the dreams will come, the whispers, the knowing of things you should know." "I don't want this," I protested. "I never asked for any of it. I just needed a job." She laughed, a surprisingly warm sound. "Nobody asks for fate, Cher. It comes all the same." She reached into her purse and withdrew a small cloth bundle tied with twine, placing it on the table between us. "For the dreams. When they get bad. Lavender, valerian root, and a few other things. Steep it in hot water before bed." I stared at the bundle, torn between gratitude and resentment. "Why help me? You worked for Thibodeau." "I worked for the funeral home," she corrected. "For the living who came to mourn their dead. Mr. Thibodeau's other business was his own." She sighed, suddenly looking every year of her considerable age. "Besides, someone needs to remember." "To what?" "The lady may be gone, but St. Martinville has other secrets. Other old things sleeping beneath the surface. A fresh wave of unease washed over me. Are you saying there are more like her? Not like her, no. She was unique, a confluence of tragedy, power, and centuries of feeding on death. Mrs. Comeau's gaze grew distant. But there are places in Louisiana where the veil is thin, where things slip through. The swamp has its own memory, its own hunger. She stood abruptly, placing a few dollars on the table for her coffee. I should go. There will be questions in town, arrangements to be made. The Thibodeau family was extensive once, but now, she shook her head. Curtis was the last of the direct line. Someone will need to handle things properly. As she turned to leave, a thought struck me. Wait, what about the bodies? Eloise Bergeron, Thomas Landry, the others who were scheduled for funerals. Mrs. Comeau paused, her expression unreadable. What bodies, Cher? Thibodeau and Sons hasn't had a client in weeks. Not since old man Poirier last month. My mind reeled. But the logbook was part of the illusion, she finished for me. The lady needed fresh souls, and the Thibodeau family had grown too small to satisfy her alone. So they created workers, clients, an entire business of comings and goings, while the real work happened in the walls. The implications hit me like a physical blow. If there had been no actual funeral business, no real clients, was a night attendant job even real? I asked, already knowing the answer. Mrs. Comeau's smile was sad. There's always been a night attendant, Cher. From the very beginning. Someone to witness. Someone to feed to the lady when the time was right. I was going to be sacrificed. Just another soul for her collection. Take my advice, Mrs. Comeau said, her voice gentler now. Leave Louisiana. Start fresh somewhere the swamp can't reach you. Somewhere without memory or history. She nodded to the bundle on the table. And use that tea. It helps. With that, she was gone, the bell jingling cheerfully in her wake. I sat immobile for several minutes, trying to process everything I'd just learned. The job, the rules, the entire scenario had been an elaborate trap designed to provide the lady with a fresh soul when she grew too restless, too hungry. And I had walked right into it. Around 9 a.m., I finally left the diner, the herbal bundle tucked into my pocket. The morning had blossomed into full heat, the air thick with humidity and the scent of magnolias. I sat in my car, staring at nothing, trying to decide what to do next. Mrs. Comeau had suggested leaving Louisiana altogether. It was sound advice, probably. Put as much distance as possible between myself and St. Martinville, between my soul and whatever lingering influence the lady might still exert. But something held me back. A sense of unfinished business, of questions still unanswered, and something else, a feeling I couldn't quite name, like a thread tugging gently but persistently at the back of my mind. I started the car and began driving, no destination in mind. After about 30 minutes, I realized with a jolt that I was heading back towards St. Martinville. I tried to turn around to force myself away, but my hands seemed to operate independently of my will, guiding the vehicle unerringly back the way I'd come. The town looked exactly as it had the day before. Ancient live oaks draped with Spanish moss, small shops along the main street, the white steeple of St. Martin, Delaware Tourist Church rising above the buildings. Nothing to suggest that a supernatural cataclysm had occurred on its outskirts just hours ago. I found myself driving down the road that led to Thibodeau and Sons, my heart pounding harder with each mile. What would I find? Ruins? Emergency vehicles? Nothing at all. When I rounded the final bend, I slammed on the brakes so hard the car skidded on the gravel shoulder. The funeral home stood exactly as it had been, the imposing Victorian structure with its burgundy paint and black trim, the wraparound porch, the smaller building behind it. No sign of collapse, no indication of damage whatsoever. I sat there staring, certain I was hallucinating. I had watched it implode. I had seen the walls fold inward, heard the crash as it collapsed into nothing. It wasn't possible for it to be standing intact. Yet there it was. In a daze, I pulled into the parking lot and got out of my car. The mid-morning sun beat down mercilessly, cicadas buzzing in the trees surrounding the property. I approached slowly, half expecting the building to shimmer and vanish like a mirage. The front door was locked, the interior dark beyond the stained glass inserts. I peered through, seeing the familiar reception area, the antique desk, the grandfather clock, the pamphlets arranged in neat stacks. Everything exactly as it had been. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Had I imagined everything? The lady, Mr. Thibodeau's sacrifice, Lily, the Chamber of Souls, all of it? Was I losing my mind? I stumbled back to my car and sat heavily in the driver's seat, my breath coming in short gasps. The scar on my palm caught the sunlight, a silvery crescent clear against my skin. Not imagined, then. But how? A tap on my window made me yelp in surprise. A young woman stood there, early 20s, dressed in a simple black dress, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. I rolled down the window with shaking hands. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice pleasant with just a hint of a Cajun accent. "Were you looking for someone?" I used to work here. I managed. Last night, I was the night attendant." Her brow furrowed slightly. "I think you must be mistaken. We don't have a night attendant position, and I've been a receptionist here for the past 5 years. I don't recognize you." I stared at her, my mind racing. "What about Mr. Thibodeau?" "Curtis Thibodeau." "Mr. Thibodeau?" She looked genuinely puzzled. There hasn't been a Thibodeau involved with a funeral home for decades. It's been owned by the Poirier family since the 1960s. The world seemed to tilt beneath me. "But the name Thibodeau and Sons?" "Oh, they kept the name for tradition's sake," she explained with a smile. "It's one of the oldest businesses in St. Martinville. Founded in 1843, according to the plaque in the reception area." I couldn't speak, couldn't think. Everything I'd experienced, everything I thought I knew, was unraveling before my eyes. "Are you feeling all right?" she asked, concern creeping into her voice. "You look pale. Would you like to come inside for some water?" "No," I said too forcefully. "No, thank you. I'm fine. Just confused. I must have mixed up addresses or something." She nodded, though she didn't look convinced. "Well, if you're sure. We're open until 5 if you need anything." As she turned to go, I noticed something that made my blood freeze. A small silver locket on a delicate chain around her neck, identical to the one I'd seen shatter in Mr. Thibodeau's hands. "That locket," I called after her. "Where did you get it?" She paused, her hand rising to touch the pendant. "This? It's a family heirloom. Been passed down for generations." Something flickered across her face, too quick to identify. "My grandmother always said it was for protection. That as long as we kept it safe, we'd be keeping everyone safe." Before I could respond, she continued toward the funeral home, climbing the porch steps with practiced ease and disappearing inside. The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow seemed to echo in the still morning air. I sat there for a long time, staring at the burgundy building with its black trim and wraparound porch, at the stained glass in the front door, depicting what I had originally thought was an abstract pattern but now recognized as a stylized woman with arms outstretched, reaching. The lady of the house wasn't gone. She had never been gone. The bargain hadn't ended, it had simply changed hands. And somehow, I was still part of it. I started my car, my decision made. I wouldn't be leaving Louisiana after all. Not yet. There were more secrets to uncover, more truths buried beneath the surface of St. Martinville and its oldest business. The mark on my palm seemed to pulse in agreement, a silent reminder of what I'd witnessed, what I'd survived. The rules had changed, but the game continued, and for better or worse, I was still a player. 6 months have passed since that night at Thibodeau and Sons. I never left St. Martinville, despite Mrs. Comeau's warnings. Instead, I rented a small apartment above the bookstore on Main Street, took a job tending bar at a local place called Boudreaux's. The pay isn't great, but the tips are decent, and more importantly, it gives me access to the town's stories, its whispers, its secrets. The funeral home continues to operate as if nothing happened. I've watched it from a distance, noting who comes and goes. The young receptionist, Marie Poirier, I learned, works there Monday through Friday, always wearing that silver locket. At night, the lights burn until exactly 10:05 p.m., then some are extinguished while others remain on until dawn, just like the rules specified. I've documented everything in a journal. My memories of that night, The information gleaned from locals about the Thibodeau and Poirier families, the strange occurrences that continue to ripple through St. Martinville like stones dropped in still water. The journal keeps me sane when I wake from dreams of stone corridors and faces in the walls, of black eyes watching from shadows. The herbal tea Mrs. Camo gave me helps with the dreams, but nothing stops the knowing. I'll be serving drinks and suddenly understand that the quiet man in the corner lost his daughter last spring, not to cancer, as everyone believes, but to something that called to her from the bayou. Or I'll pass a house and know instinctively that something ancient sleeps beneath its foundations, something that has nothing to do with the lady, but is no less hungry. I've seen Lily twice since that night. Once in the cemetery behind St. Martin, Delaware Tourist Church, sitting atop a small grave marker with her name and the dates 1963 to 1971 carved into the stone. She didn't speak, just watched me with solemn eyes before fading into the evening mist. The second time was just last week, in the reflection of my bathroom mirror at exactly 3:40 a.m. She pressed a finger to her lips, then pointed urgently at something I couldn't see before the glass fogged over, obscuring her image. A warning, perhaps, or a reminder that the rules have changed but not disappeared. I've never returned to the funeral home itself, never stepped foot on its property since that morning when I found it impossibly intact. But sometimes, driving past at night, I swear I see a figure on the porch, a tall, thin silhouette that might be a woman in white, watching the road with patient malevolence. The scar on my palm has faded somewhat, the silver crescent now a pale white, like old moonlight against my skin. But it still aches when it rains, and sometimes it burns in the middle of the night, waking me from dreams of drowning in black water or suffocating behind walls that close in inch by inch. I know I can't stay in St. Martinville forever. Whatever connection was forged that night, whatever mark the lady left on me, grows stronger with each passing day. I feel myself being drawn back to the funeral home, pulled by invisible threads that tighten with each full moon. Mrs. Camo disappeared 3 months ago. Her house sits empty at the edge of town, the garden overrun with weeds except for a patch of night-blooming jasmine that flourishes despite neglect. I visited once, found her back door unlocked, as if she'd stepped out momentarily. On her kitchen table sat a single item, another cloth bundle of herbs, larger than the first, with a note in spidery handwriting, for when the dreams become more than dreams, for when she calls you by name. I keep it with me always, along with the iron key I found beneath it, a key that matches no lock I've yet discovered, but that I know, with inexplicable certainty, opens a door I'm destined to find. I should leave, pack my meager belongings, and drive until Louisiana is a distant memory. But the roots of this story run deeper than I imagined, and I'm no longer sure where they end and I begin. The night attendant's shift never truly ends, it seems. The rules never stop mattering. And the lady of the house is always listening.